hand it over to our wonderful host, Alan, to do some introductions. So Alan is the Executive Secretary of the International Arctic Science Committee, or IASC, and he has graciously allowed us to use this space today. So if you see him, you'll be leaving this afternoon, but if you see him in the future at an Arctic conference, please buy him an adult beverage at some point. And thanks. So I guess I'll leave it to you for logistics.
So, thank you so much, Colleen.
Thanks
really
for having
quick
us.
Introduction. So yeah, my name is Alan, and I run the International Arctic Science Committee. We are based up in Akureyri, but we are sponsored by Rannís, which is why we're in this building here. So Rannís, if you're not familiar with it, is the Icelandic Center for Research, kind of like the Icelandic NSF, and they fund research in Iceland and help make collaboration and innovation happen, or some such buzzwords. IASC is supposed to help foster international and interdisciplinary cooperation in Arctic science. So I know Colleen because I also, on the side, am a research scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center. And I've met Emily before, and they were like, oh, we're looking for a meeting space in Reykjavik. And I was like, I know where that can happen. So it's so great to be able to welcome you here. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if there's anything I can get you, please let me know. I would note, so the folders that you got are to remind you that IASC is kindly providing this space. But I would point out that if you are talking to people about it, it says the address is in Potsdam, Germany. That's not actually true since the beginning of the year. But we figured it's better to use the pads than thread them away. So, yeah. On to you. What I'm also supposed to say, sorry, is that the bathrooms are, you just go out this door and they're just in the back corner there, next to the kitchenette. So if you need those, they're over there. Fire exit is also in that direction in case anything happens.
Thank you.
Cool.
So we have some new people in the room. We also have some people who haven't been to a dataARC meeting before, and some people who have kind of haven't been to a dataARC meeting in like a year or so. So I thought it would be a good idea. I'm going to be that really annoying PI and make us do a roundtable of introductions. So I'll start. My name is Colleen Strawhacker. I think I've met all of you at this point, but I just really want to thank everybody for coming and talking about dataARC and moving the project forward. And so maybe if we just want to say who we are and our role in the project, so we can all go out tonight and have beers and just kind of be able to kick it off right away. So,
hi, I'm Emily. I know most of you, but those of you who I haven't met, welcome to Iceland. And it's great to have the chance to meet you guys. I've been out of the game for the last year or so, but I'm back, and my part in the project is working on the Icelandic saga map, digital map package.
Should also say that Emily has done a lot of work doing a lot of the local organizing here, so another person to buy an adult beverage for while we are here. And thanks, she would be a wonderful person to do so for.
More importantly, also, if there are any logistical questions or if you want any advice about places to go, get a drink or things to see, then please do ask me.
Hi, I'm Holly Wright, and I work for the Archaeology Data Service, which is a national archive for archaeological data based in the UK. I'm just a guest here, so I'll be looking forward to learning about what's going on in the project, and then this afternoon I'll do a little introduction into the ADS and the Ariadne infrastructure, which is a recent FP7, EU FP7 infrastructures project for archaeological data for Europe.
I'm Adam Bryn. I'm the Director of Technology for the Center for Digital Antiquity, and I am here as the lead tech person.
Hi, I'm Rachel Opitz. I'm now a lecturer at Glasgow. I promise this is the last job change for a while.
We've had to move her civil war to like 3 different places at this point. So it's okay, Rachel, you're worth it.
And I'm here as the semantics lead for dataARC, so we're putting our data together from everyone's various disciplinary perspectives.
My name is Kevin Gibbons. I'm a PhD student at the University of Maryland. This is only my second dataARC meeting. Colleen's kindly invited me to hang out earlier, and down here. I am an archaeologist and hopefully just here to provide some input on the Zora side.
Thank you.
I'm Vicki Szabo. I have been virtually to a meeting, but not in person to a meeting. I run a North Atlantic marine mammal project that's got lots of different types of data, and dataARC is going to be piloting an Orcadian phase of that research project. with Ingrid.
Ingrid, who we're missing. I'll do it, Ingrid. Yeah. So Ingrid, as many of you heard, her flight from out of Orkney got seriously delayed, and she missed the last flight to Iceland. There's not another one until Monday, so she unfortunately couldn't make it. But we'll try to. I'm trying to record the session now. We'll see how it turns out, so we can loop everyone who can't make it back in. But we're going to try to Skype Ingrid in maybe tomorrow to talk about some of the NABONE stuff and then some of Vicky's stuff as well. So Ingrid says hi and her regards if she couldn't make it. So.
I'm Phil Buckland, work on, well, I'm a behavioral ecologist, yes, and my part is with the SEED Strategic Environmental Archaeology Database component.
I'm Tim Sexton, I'm Jack's replacement. I'm a front-end developer working on the dataARC project with Adam. I work for the Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies at University of Arkansas.
Linda Army, I'm here with the Research Data Alliance. I'm the Director of Community Development for the U.S. region, and my role in the project is mainly for international and broader data connections.
My name is Megan Hicks. I'm a PhD candidate at the City University of New York, and I'm a zooarchaeologist. So I'm really here just to absorb and learn as a data producer and data contributor. Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
I'm Richard Streeter. I'm a lecturer at the University of St Andrews. My kind of primary expertise is in technology and tephra, but my role in this is really the environmental data, the climate data, and how that's going to be integrated into this system.
I'm Tom Garland. I'm a zooarchaeologist too. I work at the City University of New York. And I think one of the things I've been sort of doing for the project is not showing up your meetings, but I've been doing others, which I will try to report on, trying to connect up potential data consumers. And we have a bunch of them. So that would be perhaps something to talk about later on.
Sounds good.
My name is Anthony Euston. I'm a lecturer at Edinburgh University, and I'm also a tephra chronology type person. And my link here is to do with databases, the tephra-based database that I manage and run, and the neighbour project management system I also manage and run.
Tom Ryan, I'm a PhD student at the City University of New York. I'm not a zooarchaeologist, but I'm near the zoos. So my role is to kind of work on getting that data in shape.
I should also say that Tim and Tom just got off a plane, so we'll be easy on them today. Give them lots of coffee, and hopefully we'll keep you guys awake. So.
I don't get any sudden loss of consciousness.
Cool. So this afternoon we need to be out. We'll start packing up around 4:30 or so, because I know people will be tired and jet lagged, and Alan needs to catch a flight up north as well. We need to be out of his hair and out of the space. So just to give you an idea of what we're of what we're up to. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks again for everyone. I know we're here on a weekend. Fortunately, the weather's pretty crappy, so it makes being inside a little bit. Yeah, it's not that bad. Makes being inside a little bit easier. But because we have a couple of new people in the room, I'm kind of going to do my typical dataARC introduction. So I apologize for people like Phil who have probably seen this like 17 times already. You can feel free to catch up on your inbox in the meantime. But so there's a couple of people in the room that have seen this 1,000 times, and some people who have never seen this. So I figured I'd just introduce you to the project, what we're trying to do, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rachel and Adam and talk about the new user interface and some of the new tools to kind of move dataARC forward. And then we're going to open up the floor and let you guys rip it apart and let us know what you think, what works, what doesn't work, what we should really be focusing on. I'm really excited that the new user interface looks great, and the new tools that Adam has been working on in the back end looks really cool. And then Rachel, not surprisingly, has been doing a ton of work on the concept map and some other semantic tools as well. So it's looking really good. So I had to put a picture of Orkney up on the screen in honor of Ingrid not being able to make it here. But as many as you know, this is our now second dataARC grant. So we had an initial workshop grant starting in 2014 until we actually are still using money on that grant, surprisingly enough, to bring people to meetings and things like that as well. So, and then last year we got the implementation phase grant through the National Science Foundation through the Resource Implementation for Data Intensive Research, or the RIDER program at NSF, to actually start to implement the things that we had talked a lot about for a couple of years in the initial grant. So some of our overall goals, and all of you have hopefully seen our initial prototype here. It's still live somehow, and you can go in and still play around with it. Although I think the data are not really, are they still loading at this point, or kind of, maybe? Okay. It's still up online as a legacy product for people to look at and see kind of the progress that we've made. But really, we're trying to build some kind of cyber infrastructure, whatever that looks like, to enable interdisciplinary synthesis research across the islands of the North Atlantic, really inspired by the work being done by NAVO on thinking about these kind of really broad, temporally deep questions, comparative across different islands of the North Atlantic. How do we provide and serve up data to help people do that with, to be able to have data to do that. So that includes things like data discovery and visualization tools, and access to interdisciplinary data sets that can be easily understood by non-specialists. And so this last point is where we've done a lot of work recently over the last few months. So what does that actually mean? So we're trying to link data from archaeology, literature and historic documents, which is where Emily is coming in, paleoecology, paleoclimate, to enable data discovery for interdisciplinary research on the long-term human ecodynamics in the North Atlantic. And I think you all have access to the proposal that we wrote, but if you don't and you want to see it, I'm more than willing to share it with you. But we have a number of use cases in the proposal that kind of show what kind of typical research questions we might be able to ask with a tool like this. And so we have this really cool use case that was kind of spearheaded by Emily in thinking about manuscript production in Iceland, and how do we link archaeological data and historic data to think about manuscript production, for example, in Iceland. So hopefully the tool that we're developing will be able to provide data to do this. So here's the typical logo slide. We have lots of different people involved in this, and I'm probably actually missing a couple of logos at this point. But we are really broad. As we kind of went around and discussed and introduced ourselves, you can tell that we're a really diverse and international group. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the different data sources going in and what's actually going into dataARC, this kind of spider webby type thing. So we have the NABO and data archaeological faunal data also coming in from Ingrid and Orkney as well. Site reports, things coming out of the NABO project management system, and literature. So hopefully publications, people can be able to cite them and pull them into the dataARC tool as well. Various individual and collaborative projects, maybe data coming out of a master's or a PhD thesis that might not kind of fit into a broader project, but can certainly be pulled into this. Gisli isn't here yet, he's coming this afternoon, but we'll be presenting on his work that he's doing on storied lines, so thinking about these networks across Iceland coming from a variety of historic and archaeological sources. So I don't think Gisli's data are loaded yet into, okay, awesome. So okay, yeah. So we'll see a little bit of Gisli's data when Adam and Rachel present, but he'll talk more about the work that he's been up to over the last couple of months this afternoon as well. Base maps are being pulled in there too. Obviously, we love our maps in archaeology, but the thing that I've been really keen on pulling in is the new Arctic digital elevation model, or Arctic DEM. So this was actually a big Obama announcement a couple of years ago, in which they gave the Polar Geospatial Center a lot of money to create 2-meter DEMs of the entire Arctic. And so that's loaded onto the new tool right now too, which will be really kind of a nice base map to look at. Phil talked a little bit about SEED, so the paleoecology database is pulled in there right now. Emily introduced the Icelandic saga map. We'll be working on pulling that in, and actually your data are loaded in there right now, but thinking about what the data in the next step should look like would be good. Anthony talked about TEFRA-base. Richard will be leading up the kind of paleoclimate records with a student that he'll be hiring, and then obviously we're really open to anybody else who'd be willing to hang out with us and do cool data stuff. Rachel's been leading the concept mapping and semantics, so not surprisingly, when we have really diverse data sets, we're going to need to think about how to link these things conceptually, both in the front end and the back end. Tim and his crew at CAST have been doing the user interface design. I like to have Lynn here, as she said, is like the data world reality check of what we're up to, really hopefully is relevant to other people outside of our group. And then Adam has been leading up the back end development. So here's our old prototype friend, still accessible online, but not really working anymore. But oh, awesome. So still working. Okay. So still working, but I just kind of wanted to remind people what it looked like, where we're kind of moving towards. So when Rachel and Adam kind of take over, you'll see kind of how far we've actually come. Rachel has done a ton of work on the concept map, and you'll probably show a little bit of that in a couple of minutes. But this is just one part of the concept map, of a very big, sprawly concept map at this point, and trying to think about what are the major concepts that this group will be what this group is really kind of focusing in and talking about, and how do they connect to other different types of concepts and data sources that are in this too. So this is the other thing that I wanted to bring up as well, and this is a figure that came out of our proposal, and we used to call them indicators, and now we're calling, and for anyone who kind of works in the Arctic observing world or in environmental sciences, this term indicator is really fraught and doesn't really mean anything, or means 1,000 different things. So Rachel and I did some brainstorming. I think I tried to come up with like 1 million ideas, and then Rachel came up immediately with the word combinator, which is actually a thing. So now we're calling, you can see my really poor photoshopping here. I went in, I actually couldn't find the original version of the figure, but now we're calling them combinators. So really what dataARC is trying to serve up are data at this level, right? So we have the individual kind of raw data sets that are stored in places like SEED and stored in places like TDAR. And these data are important to have access to for people like specialists. So we have the individual faunal elements stored in TDAR, and those are for people like Megan and Tom, who can actually have the expertise to start to process and analyze these data. Even though I have a PhD in archaeology, you don't want me getting anywhere near zooarchaeological data and trying to interpret it, because I just don't have the training to do it. That being said, as someone who doesn't have the training to do it, I'm really interested in what I can learn from the faunal data and what it can tell me about what's going on in Iceland. So this is kind of, as a non-specialist, this is the level that I'm really interested in finding out. So we make these data available. They can be found, but dataARC will be serving up data at this level. So something like ratio of sheep to cows indicating changing wealth and status of sites. So we're really working at this combinator level to really enable specialists to create these combinators and then make them understandable to people who might be interested in using those data.
Great.
Yes.
Could you maybe just explain how that links to the different levels of data?
Oh, yes. Okay. So,
still using that or not?
Yeah. So this is something that I've been trying to write up, but have been distracted by 1,000 different things. This is what happens. But in the, when we were talking about this idea of indicators, I think what's been coming up in a lot of our recent meetings is that we really struggled on what this indicator meant and now combinator meant. And so when we were in St. Andrews in March, I like to describe it in this kind of NASA levels of data kind of system. And so I have a feeling probably most people aren't familiar with the NASA levels of data here, but, and Lynn actually, or Alan, you might know better than, actually you probably do know a lot better than me. Do you want to explain the NASA levels of data? Put you on the spot. I'll probably
basically the higher the level data, the more processing. Right? So you get level 1, which comes straight off the satellite. Level 2 means that it's cleaned up to some extent, and you can use it like, instead of just raw digital numbers, it becomes a brightness value. Level 3 means it's a somewhat direct product, and then level 4 means is
like
a
the Landsat image or something.
That means it's interpretive. So yeah, if you're using Landsat, you'll go from a digital number to a radiance to a reflectance product, and then past that, it might be a classified map of vegetation types or something like that.
Yeah, so I think that kind of helped us try to think about where our data fit into this, to really think about how we're thinking about combinators, because we haven't really thought through this idea of combinators for every single one of our data sources. And I think it's going to be hard to do with some of our data sources, but really thinking about, if we're thinking about the NASA, maybe thinking NASA level 3 or something like that, or 2 or 3, in which we're kind of thinking about where we want to be serving up these data. And so really at those levels make it much more interpretable for people who aren't going to be able to process the bits and bytes coming out of the satellite, which is going to be 99% of the general population, right? Does that help?
Yeah, I thought it was just useful to kind of
think of another way.
Using that framework, or we using this framework, or how they're related to each other.
I think that it's essentially, the same thing, just kind of different ways to describe it. But Any other questions before I go on? Yes.
Just go over to third level data again, or can you just say it?
Yeah, so I think this is something, so we tried to map out all the different levels of our data while we were in St. Andrews, and I actually haven't. I should post those documents. We have them all on Slack right now, but I think it's going to be different for all of the data sets, and I think we can think through what that means for something like your faunal data. So to me, like, this is level 0, we actually thought about it's actually like the actual sample. Right, so what is sitting in a box in a curation facility, and then level 1 to me would be kind of a spreadsheet or a database of the individual faunal elements, and then maybe we can start to think about more and more what that means going up. But you would probably be a better person to do that than me for the faunal data. But essentially, these upper levels of data then will then feed into being able to do this interdisciplinary analysis, the North Atlantic, that's really embedded in data analysis. Any other questions at all?
I think we agree to disagree on the meaning of the lower levels.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Different data sources have different stages of interpretation.
Yeah, and we actually, like I said, we actually spent a few hours mapping out kind of what the different levels were for different data sets, and I can post that document on Slack for people to take a look at kind of what we had brainstormed for various data sets as well. And Emily, we tried to do it for you, but I'd be curious to see what you think, how wrong we were for the sagas. Yeah. Any other questions?
We were, I think, digging the memory archive. Were we supposed to be writing an article?
Yes, yeah, I have one outlined pretty well, but it's getting there.
We were supposed to be contributing to that.
I'll let you know when I'll let you know when it's not really embarrassing to look at for other people to contribute to it. Yeah, but we'll be writing an article because I think this is going to be a really nice contribution of dataARC, because I think a lot of the synthesis research going on right now is like, you know, the expertise of putting people in the room and hashing things out, like we've done, for example, in the comparative NAVO Southwest research that produced a really wonderful PNAS article a few years ago, but then how do we kind of make the data available to back up what we were actually saying in that article? So dataARC is kind of really helping to back up with the data to be able to do that synthesis research. So good. So you'll see an example of how we're creating combinators in the back end really soon. You might have also seen this on Slack. I got really sick last week, so that means I had all this free time to do all the stuff on my to-do list, like not writing articles, but doing project websites instead. Is that we finally have a new project website up. It's not finished yet, but at least there's some stuff on there for people to go and check out kind of some of our main goals and what we've been up to. I'll be posting kind of publicly available meeting notes and summaries of what we've talked about over the last couple of meetings. Not everyone is on there yet. I sent out an email to kind of the people who've been coming to meetings and engaged in dataARC about putting you on the website. So if I didn't hear back from you, I didn't put you on there, but would love to corner you at some point during the meeting. And if you want to be on the website, we can add your photo and a little description of kind of what your role in the project is. But I think and if I'm missing anything, I think I had all of the affiliated organizations, but if I'm missing you, I'm really sorry, and I'll add you right away. Just let me know. So.
I still think the cups of coffee, it's not accurate.
Oh yeah, it's still too low. I think I put it at like 1,400 or something like that, which it is probably too low. So yeah, check it out. Let me know if I'm missing anything or if there's anything should be added or anything. But that if anyone is asking about dataARC now, there's a place to go for people to find more information, which is really nice because I know people are really interested to see what we're coming up with. So just a couple of meeting objectives for the next couple of days. In a second, we're going to debut our new user interface and the work that Adam has done on the back end. What do you think? How are you going to break it? What would you change? We'll talk quite a bit about that and what the next steps look like as well. This idea of the combinators, at what level are we serving things up in dataARC is probably going to be different for all the different data sets. How do we best create them? And then we also need to determine next steps for our various data sources. So things like what do the data look like when we're serving them up to Adam to make his life a little less crazy as well. I should also mention that we have minions at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, undergraduate minions who can help us, and they're desperately looking for work and cool work, and the archaeology is really cool to them because they're used to working with those boring physical scientists. So they get really excited. They get really excited when they get to work with archaeological data. So we can have them help us with data cleanup as well. And then we need to kind of talk to Anthony and Richard about, and then Emily too, about kind of, not surprisingly, really focused on kind of Phil's data sets and Geesley's data sets, but then how do we take the next steps with our other data sources to really start to fold them in. So I'm gonna stop talking and hand it over to Rachel and Adam, but are there any questions for me before they take over at all? Cool. You guys ready?
Can you just say that you deserve being bugged?
I'll be more than happy to take them if you want to.
Thank you for
Oh yeah, well I'm really happy to have you guys here. So this is fun. So I'll hand it. Do you guys want to use my computer or okay? Let me.
Oh, and for anyone who hasn't noticed yet, on the Iceland 2017 meeting channel on Slack, we've started the traditional collective notes document.
Oh, thanks,
today.
guys.
And Adam shared Lean's document from the Scotland meeting that has the
Thanks.
levels of data in it for anyone who wants to look at the charts on the second page.
I'm just going to share the desktop here so you guys can show whatever you want. Okay.
Yep.
Iceland's not the same. Iceland.
Oh.
They're always having this.
That's what it says on the Boston, $287. Sorry? $287. Boston.
Oh, damn.
Oh, okay.
Maybe seriously to that.
Iceland.
Boston's like the one that I pay attention to. It never goes on sale.
That's the one that's why I'm here.
It's really fun.
Do you want to start with
Well done. Okay.
Sure.
Hosting this meeting was worthwhile.
Yeah.
I'm going to the Iceland website right
Fine, cheap
So-
lights.
We're gonna start with the new front end, and we may be calling on Tim at various points as someone instrumental in the creation of the new front end, and then we'll have a look at some of the back end tools.
So we sat down with Tim and John and Chris and Jack. I guess it was early summer, May of this year, and sort of went over all of the challenges and issues that people had identified with the old prototype. The fact that it was hard to actually see the data, it was hard to interact with the tool because everything was scrunched in its all different corners, and that there was sort of no direct way of actually working with the interface because of all those different pieces. And we tried to lay out what it was that we wanted to accomplish based on those critiques and criticisms, and try and figure out how we could better put things together. And so what we identified was that what we would try and do would be to break each component into a dedicated screen, and that we would try and find a way to present all of the information as well as why things were the way they were, so that people could understand what they were doing and how they were doing it. And ideally, that as somebody built a question with the tool by selecting time and place and concept, that we would end up with, instead of a horizontal sort of poster like is in this room, that you could almost create a vertical conference poster that allowed you to see every aspect of things, but that it would be heavily interactive and dynamic, but also that it would always get you back to Phil's data or Anthony's data or anybody else's data in as few steps as possible.
So basically, the new website, which you guys can see the kind of main landing screen for here, is, I would say, much more linear than the old website. So before, we were kind of trying to show you temporal aspects and geographical aspects and conceptual aspects on the same screen, which was responsible for everything being kind of squashed together. And what we've done now, yeah, Adam's just pulling up the old one, hopefully. So yes, and just to remind everyone, this is kind of the old version, and you can see we've got everything kind of up at once. And so what we've done now is we've essentially broken it into different screens. So you're going to scroll down. So it's a much more linear process. And the idea behind it from our point of view is that this steps you through the process of making a query. Tim, I don't know if you have any immediate comments. No, that's what it does. Okay, so maybe it's going to be useful to just kind of take you through what we have. So you land here, and not everything is finished yet, but you can see that we have some placeholders up there for examples. So the idea is that if you click on any of those, it's going to give you a pre-worked out example of a search run through a keyword, a search run using the spatial data, a search run using the temporal data, or a search run starting with concepts. So I don't think we've got anything in those yet.
No, but you obviously could also have a search run that combines all of these things too, but mainly just that you have some starting points.
Yeah.
So in the future, are we thinking in terms of an example from our publications?
Yeah, I think having some published examples with citations would be awesome. And I think that's something that Colleen has talked about grad students helping with in the future.
Yeah, and regionals.
And non-grad students.
And non-grad students, and whoever wants to do that. Yeah.
The challenge across all of this, both the back end and the front end, is that everybody's data is so diverse and so different that we have balance issues of how to present it in such a way that if we're working with faunal data that deals with bones and we're dealing with summary data from seed, that you can easily get overwhelmed in different types of details, different people's data, and summarization becomes an issue as well as collation in such a way that one of the things that we've tried to do with the interface is to make sure, or try to make sure, that one person's data doesn't completely overwhelm. And in some ways we've succeeded, I think, in other ways not so much.
So should we walk through and maybe give some examples of this?
Yeah, and one of the ways that we've done this is by trying to break things into these three categories, which you'll see over and over and over again. And these are probably not the final categories, but they're good ways to start, of whether it's archaeological data, historical data, or model data.
And we're using model here as a bag for something like a paleoclimatic model or a paleoenvironmental model. So a lot of the environmental data has ended up in the model box. Okay, so maybe rewinding a little bit would be useful for us to just step through the interface and kind of the different sections before we get into the weeds on each one.
Sure.
Adam's been permanently in the weeds, so
yes, yeah.
I'm going to attempt to reel us back. So this is your kind of landing page. So you start up here.
And you can actually go to it. It's online, and you can go to it at the URL, so beta.dataarc.org if you want to play with it too.
So we've got different examples for if you haven't used the tool before. We then say explore the data, and we give you kind of three main routes in. So the temporal route, the spatial route, and the conceptual route. And this comes out of the discussions that the group has had about the ways we tend to ask questions of our collective data. So some people are really interested in a specific period, so you would then start in the timeline. Some people are doing research on a region, right? You come in with a regional question, you only care about the me button, you start with the map search, or you come in with an idea or kind of a theme, and then you would come in through the conceptual search. So if you hit timeline, so let's see, it should hopefully bounce us to the timeline section. There we go. I know how to use a Mac, really. So can you talk a little bit about how the timeline is set up? And I'll attempt to do Vanna White things.
So the timeline is set up to try and give you some perspective overall of where the data lies. And you've get millennia to start, and then if you click on a millennium, then it will break down into century, and if you click on century, it'll give you decade. And the mouse over should show
Yeah, it did.
It did,
Yeah.
when it's popped
the
open.
number of
Mm-hmm.
data items, and
Yeah.
this was working yesterday.
No, it's just a little slow, but it was doing it a second ago.
Well,
So obviously each color corresponds to the type of data. So the idea here really is if you are thinking about coming into the data and you want to be able to focus your research on kind of data-rich areas, so you want to know which century or which decade has lots of paleoclimate data, you know, so where all the modeling data is, lots of archaeological data. So to be able to target your search a bit that way.
It's all modeling data.
And the saturation is indicating that of the color,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm caught on is the decade data was empty. And
There are still bugs.
there's still bugs. Yeah.
But so
And not just bugs database.
yeah. So the idea here really is, you know, if you're coming in, and you're saying, okay, I'm an archaeologist and I'm looking for complementary historical data, I can see that there are lots and lots of historical results in the first millennium CE. So kind of starting at 1000. So that might be a good way for me to filter the data and to start to look. So I'm going to say, okay, that's a reasonable time period I can target my research at. Yeah. So we can hopefully then apply the filter. Okay, so next step, spatial data.
So spatial data is displayed in a couple of different levels. The points represent specific data entries, and most of this is Giesle's farm database.
And this is maybe a good moment to return to your point about some people's data overwhelming other people's data.
Yeah. So I think some of this is sagas, and you can see a few bits of seed in here, and you can see a tiny bit of archaeological data in there. There's a tiny bit of blue.
It's hiding under all the orange.
But if we zoomed in, I think maybe we'd be able to see it.
Let's see. Okay.
Oh yeah, there's
Wait,
a little dot of blue there.
Okay, we're gonna let it refresh for a second. But okay, I'm zooming in the wrong way. There
Yeah,
it is.
there you go.
Okay.
So now we can see it. And if you click on a given point, so if you click on a point, you can then see where the data actually came from at some granularity.
So this again is another thing that we've tried to put in to give you the ability to understand kind of where the data rich areas are. And again, it's part of the why, because you're building a query as you're going. So you're searching for information on different things. And we want it to be really apparent to you why maybe your query isn't returning the information you think it should be returning. And you know, often that's going to be linked to simply, is there historical data for the region I'm interested in? Is there, you know, where is the paleoclimatic data? Where is the archaeological data?
And then you can filter both by selecting a bounding box, or you can select on some pre-existing regions that we layered into the system. So we took the Prepper map that we got at the first prototype for Iceland and put that in along with Greenland. So you could, in this case, I have selected that region.
Mm-hmm.
Can you also show the Arctic DEM
Sure.
base map? See how. So here are some different base maps, and Giesle has some that are historic maps that we can fold in, that we've folded into the previous prototype that we can pull in there too. But so there, if you so the Arctic DEM is in there. Is obviously some gaps in their data that they're still trying to finalize.
I was going to say, just as a nerd, which version of the Arctic DEM is this?
I don't. Yeah, I'm sure whatever
you sent us.
whatever they're serving up as a web service. So yeah.
So yeah, so those are kind of our basic filters there. And let's see, where is the add this filter to the map button? Or does
if
it
you click
automatically
on it,
apply?
I think at the
if you click on it,
Mm-hmm.
then click filter.
Okay, there we go. See, I know how it works.
And now you're down to 39 bits of data, and you can see that it sort of
grays out everything that's not in your search.
And then you see the number of the results at the top too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, this is something we're putting in to try and give you a sense of whether or not the way you're building your query is actually pulling back data. So if you are saying to yourself, okay, I'm really interested in the first millennium in a certain region, you start putting filters together and that results number goes down to 0, you may want to rewind and rethink your question a little bit. So just in terms of data exploration, we're really trying to make sure it's clear kind of how much information is available in different areas. And this is really geared towards the interdisciplinary user who might not know where data is available in other people's data sets in a temporal and spatial sense.
And one thing to note is whenever you do a filter like this, in all 3 of the areas, timeline, map, and concept, it will gray out things that don't match what's in your filter. So all 3 are constantly updated with no matter which filter you
Oh, via like timeline and concept as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why now that we're down to the concept area, I think pretty much everything is grayed out except apparently for the word dog, which we must have some things attached to.
We have found some dog data.
So you guys are all familiar with the concept map from previous meetings, I think. So the reason why not a lot is showing up on the concept map right now is because it is your job to map your data to these concepts using the combinator. So this is something we're going to be talking about and then doing during this meeting. But ideally, when you come down to this point, those results will be tagged with these different concepts. So the data that is getting pulled back by your spatial and temporal filters will be attached to different concepts within our big topic model, essentially, within our concept map. And you will then also be able to filter based on those kind of thematic parameters.
So if I unfilter, you can see that there are a few other concepts that are up. And if we zoom in, you can see as you sort of mouse over a concept, it'll show more clearly what the concept is and its direct relationships.
And so just to remind everyone and as an explanation for people who haven't been before or haven't been for a while. So basically what we've tried to do is define a set of shared topics that we think the group's kind of collective data sets speak to. So these are things that kind of relate to everyone's research questions. And then what we've tried to do is map the way those concepts relate to one another. And this has been quite a complicated exercise and a philosophical exercise for all of us, because obviously everything can connect to everything else, and we can then have kind of conceptual spaghetti in our universe. So we've really tried to pick the primary relationships and to build relationships that are going to pull data together in an interesting way. So the concept map is really our interdisciplinary glue, because everyone's data set speaks to these concepts in different ways. So from a search point of view, what should happen, what we're aiming for, is that you will have the option to get back all the data that is then attached to the concept you're interested in, if you choose to filter by, say, domestic animals. Or you can choose to get the results back that are related to domestic animals and everything that is one conceptual degree away, which is what you see visualized here. So concepts that we think are really closely related to that concept. So in our world here, domestic animals are closely related to animal husbandry. This hopefully makes sense to people. To butchery, and again, this is a way to pull in dataARC data. And importantly, to dung as a form of fertilizer. So this is, you know, kind of a primary set of relationships. And again, the idea with the concept map is that if I'm coming in as someone who's primarily kind of a survey type archaeologist, and that's my perspective, this set of search results is going to return to me not just stuff from, say, Geesley's farm data, which might be my primary interest, but also the dataARC data that is tagged to things like butchery and animal husbandry. And the idea is to encourage me to also look at that related data.
And
So,
the next level,
mhm.
as you can see highlighted as well.
Yeah.
The secondary and tertiary
Mhm.
level search, though, is not something that's implemented yet.
But it's coming to the ideas that you can say, okay, I want just what's related to my idea. I want my idea plus 1 degree of separation. I want my idea plus 2 degrees of separation. So that you can essentially either have quite a broad search and pull in lots of data that's maybe tangentially related to what you're looking at, or you can have a more narrow, specifically defined search.
So can we ask questions as well?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yes,
So
please.
I think this is absolutely wonderful. And I'm curious as to whether when you were doing these mappings,
Mhm.
did you start from existing control vocabularies, or did you say, right, this is the data we have, we're going to express the relationships we see in the data as best we can,
Mhm.
or did you or did you do both? Or because I can see this being really useful
Yeah.
this project.
So the concept mapping has taken up a
It's been
lot
very,
of our time.
it's been very fraught.
So what I would say is a lot of it came out of a series of conversations at meetings like this one about A, what data people had available, but B, what questions we had. So we really worked through a number of kind of case study research questions, and then pulled out kind of big ideas, big themes from that. So part of the concept mapping comes from that, and then part of it comes from what's in people's data. And you'll see in a moment that the combinators, their role is really to explicitly define those relationships between everyone's very granular data and kind of the big shared themes that came out of the concept map.
But after that, you also went through the different appropriate controlled vocabularies to identify how they could link together, and then use SciDoc to sort of glue them together.
Yeah, so basically you will see this a bit more clearly on the back end. We've done 2 things, as Adam was saying. So one is in terms of controlled vocabularies. We essentially borrowed from existing taxonomies. So like we didn't want to have to create the entire zooarchaeology universe taxonomy because the NCBI has already done that. Like there's a big established taxonomy. And so what we did, what I did is I went through and I mapped our concepts. So our cow has an equals to, and then the NCBI taxonomy term. And so we see this as a way to link out because it lets you kind of then get out into those other controlled vocabularies and ontologies and kind of maybe find related data outside of the dataARC pool. So that's part of it. And then within our own set of concepts, we've been, I think, mostly creatively using the CDOC CRM. So I think I've broken all of the actual rules, but trying to use the CDOC again to take advantage of existing work and existing structures of knowledge. So you'll see when we show the back end, and maybe here, if we hover.
Click on
This. Nope,
not that
wow.
way.
I don't know how to use Mac.
That's another thing.
If you click here, you get the right
Okay.
click. So here you see the item, and then you can click on the relationship, and you can see the SciDoc property as well as the different front and back.
So we've tried to define all of the, for the semantics people in the room, we've tried to define all of the nodes on the map as SciDoc E elements and the relationships between them as SciDoc P elements.
For people in the room that aren't familiar with SciDoc, could you explain it for them?
So the SciDoc CRM is just a big ontology, so big kind of formal structure of knowledge, and it's probably the most used one in archaeology right now. You may have comments on it.
Cultural heritage.
In cultural heritage, yeah. So So we've kind of decided to go with the flow in that sense and buy into it. But we felt it was fairly useful for our data because there are extensions to deal with science data and explicitly to deal with excavation data and to deal with textual data. So we felt like it was a good toolkit for us to start to glue together our fairly diverse set of data.
And it's built to be extended.
And it's built to be extended, and Achille doesn't seem to get too grumpy when I do things that are probably not meant to be done. So we'll kind of inevitably end up in the weeds on this, but it's really been the product of conversations among this group about how we see our knowledge coming together. And so the idea is that as you get down towards the bottom, are you just sneaking more coffee?
You made a very awkward sound too.
That you then get your kind of matched results. In this case, we only have archaeological ones, but broken down by those categories. So the archaeological, historical, and model categories.
I was just
I'm letting Adam drive. Yeah.
I'm just clearing the filter. Do I need to be sneaking coffee, or can I just take coffee?
You can just take coffee. Okay, so yes, so this is better. So hopefully you'll get matched results, and it's then showing you which data sets your results are coming back from. And again, this is, you know, part of, as we've been discussing over the past year or so, part of our effort to spam our fellow researchers with results from disciplines that are related to these shared concepts we've defined, but aren't necessarily their area of expertise. So this is what we've been kind of talking about all along, is kind of getting ourselves to look at one another's data by having that stuff pulled back when you search. And so Adam's gone ahead and opened up the detailed data, and this is the part where you can choose to get into the weeds, and this is also where a lot of our conversation has been about at what level of detail we want to present the data, and at what point we want to say, you know what, we really don't want non-experts monkeying around with our data at this level, or all of our data at this level is in Icelandic, and therefore it's not going to be hugely useful for many of our users. But yeah.
So we can, based on whose data, have very different displays of tables and graphs and other things. And not all of it is perfect, in case anybody's already noticed all the different issues. Sorry, Phil. Sorry.
Do you know what the y-axis means on that?
Should be counts.
Just counts?
I think it's a number of, it's MNI, minimum number of
individuals. Yeah, we need to label our axes on our graphs. So
Yep.
it's a work in process.
We also need to discuss
what is showing.
we want to show.
Yeah. And again, this is something that we've been having conversations about in the group for a while. So this is kind of our latest stab in terms of, so obviously when you first get your results back, you get a summary of how many results you're getting from different types of data. When you start to actually look at the data, what kind of information do we want to have pulled back and presented to the user?
Yeah.
And that's going to be, different for every single data set.
How's it counting the number of sources then?
Here, or?
For each of the data sources.
That's individual entries, maybe?
Yeah, so each.
So it's
So in some cases, it's each phase, such as the NABONE data, because I group things by phase, which may be right or may be wrong, but I did it.
We can talk about
Sorry. Some of it is specific sample, like in seed, but it might better be grouped by site. I don't know. Some of it is just farm or data entry, as it is in sagas or so on.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, so a lot of our questions, or something we certainly want to talk through over the next couple of days, is how we're going to kind of do this counting and grouping of these different entries, because you can see there are vastly different numbers coming back from these different data sources. And as Adam said earlier, we don't want one data source to overwhelm others, and we particularly don't want that to happen simply because it's being grouped differently. So if we show the seed data at the sample level of granularity and the NABONE data at the phase level of granularity, it looks like there's a lot more seed than NABONE, which may not actually be true.
Yeah.
And something else just to remind everyone, and for those who weren't in the Scotland meeting earlier in the year, one thing that we talked about was kind of our own world of long tail data sets. So we've got a couple data sets that are really big, that have a lot of stuff in them. Geesley's Farm Histories database, Seed has a lot in it. But some of these smaller data sets, like the Orkney faunal database, just to pick an example, might only be pulling back a few records, but those might be really important to your question. So one of the other things we're trying to do here is to not let those smaller data sets get squashed within the research set.
And that's one of the reasons for the overall categorization as well, is that it's harder to actually see whose data it is, and therefore easier to make sure that we get everybody's. The other sort of sections that we haven't talked about and haven't really built out, we wanted to be able to have people save their work and be able to come back to it, and ideally to be able to build on it and share. And so that's something that's still yet to be implemented.
That is coming.
As well as being able to have some summary of why the data that came back is the data that came back, that is showing the important topics and the relevancy of the different levels of data that were returned. That is what was directly relevant because it was in that topic group or one level out or two levels out. So that's some of the work yet to be done, is that summarization.
So this is another kind of area for discussion at this meeting, is this why section, which is something we didn't have in the original prototype and we've really added on, because we think, for me, and this is something we talked about in Arkansas, Tim, when we were there, one of the real issues with a lot of these data exploration tools, and with a lot of database query tools in general, is okay, you go and you build your query and you get a result set back and you have no idea whether or not this result set is useful, reflective of what's actually in the data. Like, why did I get this set of things back that I got back? Especially when you build more complicated queries, when you go through all these steps of filtering by time, filtering by place. Okay, that might be fairly straightforward, but when you start to filter by concept, you know, you're going to be going, well, why did I get this result in the farms database? Like, why is this tagged to my result set? Why is this relevant to what I'm doing? And so we think it's going to be really important to present some summarized explanation of, okay, here are the filters you applied, and here are the different results that have come back, kind of stacked by how relevant they are to your query. So a bit of kind of explanation at the end of the process of how you've gotten to where you've gotten to hopefully add some transparency.
So one of the issues here is that you get lots and lots of results back, which overwhelm. Is that, how does it deal with maybe a data set that doesn't have a very clear time, you know, doesn't say it's from a particular time? Does that just show up in all times, or does that, you know,
so
does that get excluded?
I think this is something we have to discuss.
Right now, I actually don't know whether it gets excluded or not. One of the things that we have to figure out is how we deal with temporal data, because not everybody even has given us specific dates. In some cases, we have geologic phases or other things. And so now that we have an interface that can actually show the data in a way that we can interact with, I think that one of the things that we're going to have to do is figure out how to do this sort of date translation. You know, we found in some of the NABONE data that we were given phase maps that gave approximate time ranges for stuff, which is what I applied, which it's my fault if it's wrong. So,
No, that's okay. I mean,
but
the dating ranges can be looked at.
Yeah.
Because in the previous iteration, like I guess 2 years ago, you know, talking to people and sort of confronting this, in Greenland they had 3 phases.
Yeah.
That are all based on the separation of calibrated radiocarbon dates, as much as anything else. And it's where you get clean break between, you know, date ranges. Other people don't use those. sometimes you're getting a situation where we're using 2 sigmas, using 1 sigma. Sometimes now increasingly they're doing Bayesian stuff.
Yeah.
There's a dissertation underway right now, which is doing this huge reworking of all North Atlantic materials that you guys have been working with. Yeah, Mike Lena. And that's changed a bunch of stuff already. So
yeah, even within
you can easily come up with 2 or 3 different date ranges for the same phase, the same site.
So what we'll have to do is figure out both necessarily, maybe by data source, but overall rules of if no data is provided, what happens? If a data is provided, what sort of fuzziness do we build into the tool versus not?
I think something we've considered doing that would be particularly relevant for the kind of climate modeling type data where you've got a broader range is weighting its relevance. So saying, okay, like, you know, we're very confident that this bit of the date range the model applies to.
Yeah.
And as you get out towards the edges of where you feel confident that your model applies, the model data would still appear, but rather than ending up in that kind of first tier set of results that's really, really relevant, it might be in the second tier and then the third tier. And that would be something that would then in the Y section have to be explained, that you are getting back paleoclimate data, but you're getting it in tier 3 because it's only tangentially related to your results in the sense that this is the bit of the timeline where we're not sure, we're not as confident that the model really applies.
Yeah,
so I don't know.
So I'm just looking at, I just worked through, I've got Sega Nabone data and it divides time into 25-year blocks. I don't know if that's a Nabone thing or that's just something that you've done. And of course that doesn't mean it, you know, there's nothing dated to those particular those units. So it's just how, but there will be sort of between the Landman Tephra and the, which is now dated to 877 and the 9398 Tephra or whatever the ESV Tephra is now named to. But you know, there are blocks of time and then there will be some radiocarbon dates things as well. So it's going to have to be really carefully thought out how you, because otherwise it's quite misleading, not intentionally misleading, but it's misleading how things are grouped together. And then people might be making connections that don't really exist or seeing data divided into timelines that don't really exist. And I guess also in the longer term, it needs to be fluid as well, because obviously dates change. So the Landman Tephra for ages was called 871 plus minus 2, because people chose that one and you can build a museum called that. And now with the reconciliation of the ice cores, it's actually the 877 date, which it did exist in a different ice core, is now seems to be a much better age. And so these things aren't necessarily static, even that isn't necessarily static as well. So it's having the flexibility to sort of, it's how we do that with things that are already published.
Yeah.
Or sort of already available. They may call it 871 or something, but we now know that's not the right, as we know it now, is not the correct age. So it's an interesting issue.
And to say that we've got a good phase that's well bounded by the 2 Tephras, the Landman Tephra and the ESV Tephra, the 938, plus or minus 6. Then the one above that we know is later than 938, but where does it stop? And that's where there's all the work done with the Bayesian stuff on the multi-radiocarbon dates of transfer where it ends. But if you just start talking about back and forth with Ori, one of those is hard set dates, which we pretty much tied the calendar. The other one's still fuzzy.
So
one of the questions is do you have a mechanism, or could you think of having a mechanism which could have people make a choice? I'm going to make a type 2 error or type 1 error. Am I going to, how far am I going to push down towards being willing to be wrong to get tighter dates versus how much am I going to lump it all? Oh, it's all liking age.
I think,
true, but not very interesting.
We're probably about to say the same thing. Maybe.
I was going to say, I think that this is something that we can spend days on, but maybe best to pull out of the weeds for the moment, or the specific date issues, and just highlight, this is an issue, and this is something that we haven't built out a lot of handling for. And so what you have is extremely gross in probably multiple meanings of that word. And so it is going to do a great job of provoking these sorts of discussions. But if you will bear with us and allow us to just sort of.
I guess at the line, it's making use of the fact we do actually have really good dating for some things and then really sloppy dating for lots of other things.
I would say that we've got two things built into the system right now that are heading us in the direction of handling this problem, one of which is, and I've scrolled back to the timeline for it. So we've got our chronology set out at 3 levels, right? Like, so you can look at it at the millennium level and you can filter at the millennium level. Like I cannot choose to apply my filter at the millennium level, which is effectively me saying I'm only, I'm willing to be very general about my dates. I'm thinking in terms of the whole Viking Age. Or I can choose to zoom in and to go all the way down to the decade level, which is not currently showing anything. But I can essentially say, I really want to just look at 1330 to 1340, which is me saying, I only really want to deal with things that we're confident get tagged to that level. So I feel like the fact that we're allowing people to filter either at the millennium, the 100-year, or the 10-year frame is kind of maybe a way to kind of dealing with the fact that if you've got fuzzy temporal data, you probably only want to apply filters at the millennium or the 100-year scale. And if you've got quite fine temporal data.
How lucky do you feel?
Exactly.
That's a good one.
One of the things we asked them to do is come up with, what do you think the date range is? What's your best, what do you really think as the analyst and working with it and it's been bouncing back and forth? What's your best guess? And sometimes that's a very broad range because people are playing very safe. And so you're like, no, I really think this is late 9th century. I think this is, that's what you got. I don't care if the outliers. That's it. I believe it.
I think that we are going to have to implement a similar fuzziness factor to the dates in the same way that we've done with the timeline and allow people to sort of apply that sort of relevancy. But again, one of the challenges of getting here is just the diversity of everybody's data to get it into a single tool to visualize. And so getting down to the granularity of the temporal problem, as we've been talking about, is something that we've put off up until now.
So Magdalena's data for her PhD, where she's got the best record of radiocarbon dating from Iceland, from archaeological sites, which is part of the PhD. She's based in the University of Iceland, and Laurie's supervising me, and Andy's supervisor as well. So her data would fit into this fantastically, but please don't ask her just at the moment because she's trying to finish. But once she's done that in the next few months, her data would be ideal for this because she's been through it, she's checked it, she's checking all of the relationships, the context and things, but she needs to finish PhD. So I won't.
We won't bug her for a while.
I'm only going to mention it to her when I go back to Edinburgh because she's in Edinburgh. But I think her data and all the Bayesian work that she's done would fit into this fantastically.
Oh, that's great.
It would be really, really good.
We know she's serious, but every once in a while we get emails from her all in caps.
But she's just trying to finish, and she's
we won't distract her.
We've been there, other distractions are not good.
But so I think one of the things we can maybe try and work through a bit more in this meeting is, so you guys as data suppliers are tagging your data, and you'll see we've got it built out for concepts right now. You're attaching your data to different concepts, but we may also, although we haven't built it yet, ask you to tag your data with level of temporal certainty. Like, do you want this data to only show up in the 1000 level filtering, or are you happy for this piece of data to show up when people are applying filters at the 25-year level? And that may be a means for you as data providers to say, I'm happy for people who are thinking on the decade level to have this result pulled back.
Is it possible to have these things as variable? So the moment you've got the sort of millennial, centennial, and then you've got decade, is it possible to
you want a slider?
You want to
look at Tim's face. Tim's face is like, I don't know if I want to build a slider.
Sounds cool, doesn't it?
Well, we had a slider in the first prototype.
Having them somewhat variable may work. One of the maybe this is a good enough transition to the back end as any. One of the challenges is just how much work is necessary to make this interactive in a useful way. And so if we go into the back end,
before we do that,
Mhm.
it might be
Coffee break?
bathroom, human needs break.
Okay.
Unless people want to keep going or if people need coffee.
You have
So yeah, let's take 20 minutes or so, give people a chance to
Okay.
process, and then
Yeah.
bathroom.
Just a
we'll go
reminder,
to the back
bathrooms
end.
are in that corner of the building. If they're occupied, they're in the same place on any floor. So you can use the spiral staircase back
Thanks, Alan.
there. You can totally do that.
Everyone ready to get started again? Alan?
Yeah, okay, cool. So I didn't practice my spiel at the beginning and I forgot to mention a few things. One, I should have mentioned that IASC is doing, if you're staying around in Reykjavik for Arctic Circle, we're doing a few sessions at the Arctic Circle meeting next week on connecting Arctic scientists with policymakers, connecting Arctic scientists with business and industry, one on Arctic observations, and one on observers' roles in the Arctic Council. So if those are topics of interest, you should come find us. And the second thing I meant to say was if you go to the IASC website, which is on your swag, you can sign up for our mailing list there, and you should definitely do that. IASC, what I also didn't say, is made up of 23 different member countries. Any country that has an Arctic research community can be a member. You don't have to be one of the Arctic 8. And there are representatives from every country on each of our scientific working groups: atmosphere, cryosphere, marine, terrestrial, social, and human, as well as our overarching council. And we really want people to see both the people who relate to their discipline as well as the people from their country as connections to IASC. And you can use them to find out more about IASC or email me anytime, and I should have said.
Thank you. And we do have a couple of dataARC affiliates going to be at the Arctic Circle meeting. I don't think
great.
anyone in here is staying for the Arctic Circle meeting, but Peter Pulsifer will be there. He's coming tomorrow. And Christian Madsen, who is a Greenland guy, couldn't come to this meeting because he's going to the Arctic Circle meeting, but really keen on finding out what we're doing in dataARC. And so I'll shoot them an email and let them know about that.
And Astra's team is going to be there.
Oh, good. Okay.
Astra will be.
Yeah, good.
And IASC hosts the Arctic Science Summit Week every year. If you've heard of that big interdisciplinary Arctic science meeting. This year it's going to be in June, hosted together with the Antarctic research community as well. So almost every session at that conference, except 2, I think, are going to be joint polar sessions, which I think is going to be really interesting.
You're going bipolar again.
We're just going polar. And abstract submissions are open until the end of this month.
Yeah, and so there'll definitely be a dataARC paper there, but if anyone is interested in going, let me know. And I'll be presenting on Aloka stuff too.
And there are tons of side meetings before the conference as well. Workshops from the Association of Polar Early Scientists. There's a computing workshop for polar scientists. A bunch of disciplinary workshops beforehand. And then after the science conference, there's also the Arctic Observing Summit. So lots of great stuff. So basically just moved to Switzerland for 2 weeks next summer.
Yeah.
That'll be great. Thanks.
Who could say no to that?
Right. And it's not as expensive as you think.
I don't know, Alan.
It's for like $65 a night.
Cheaper than Norway.
Yeah, right. cheaper than Reykjavik.
Okay, so having shown you guys a tour of the front end, we know you have questions, but what we want to do is show you the back end so that you kind of see both sides of the picture, and then we can hopefully get more into the weeds on discussing things that we've already started to identify, like tagging to different temporal resolutions that will be kind of next phase goals for us. I will be in mom mode and remind everyone that if they need coffee or snacks, you should just come and get it and not feel you have to sneak around. As demonstrated by our fearless leader, Colleen. Okay, so back end stuff.
Okay.
Do you want to show the data sources before we do combinators, or do we want to jump into combinators?
I figured I'd give a general tour of the
Okay. Yeah.
That's okay.
Yes, go for it.
So when when you last saw the backend, all that you saw was the ability to create and map combinators. But what I've started to create is a backend that allows you to see all of the different components. So we have the ability to load different GeoJSON files. This is so that for the maps that we have the ability to show things like the wrapper, or if we decided that there were different groupings that we wanted to layer on, that we could put in as many as we wanted. User management, which we have the ability to load and preview the topic and the concept maps. This is mostly right now a Rachel only, but you can see each of the different concepts as they come in and what their hierarchies are.
So something maybe to explain here is, so we're trying again to show you guys where the data is. So this is something we're really trying to build into the tool. So you'll see what Adam has done is, if you look next to children, so are those the topic IDs that go next to each one?
Yeah, they're not the number of things mapped.
That's coming in the future?
That shows up in a different place.
Okay.
So this is mostly just to make sure that the data is coming in right.
Yeah.
So it shows you how things are related to other things.
So, and parents and children being the topic above, so kind of the root topic, and the topics below that topic. So this is a view of how the different concepts are mapped together in a different way.
And then you can also see the relationships between the concepts. And so this is the way to actually see how SciDoc is mapped between the different pieces. This is just a peek behind the curtain so that people can see where the data is coming from, but would be less useful necessarily at this point, I think. The data sources, which is what I'm calling schema, but I should rename, because right now this is just me looking at and quickly fumbling through, allow you to identify and load the data themselves. And I'll go into Maybone briefly. We can provide a link, a categorization, and a description.
Sorry, Adam, can I interrupt you really quick? The link to the data source, does that mean kind of linking back to the raw data that are in TDAR, for instance?
So we have two different levels of linking. The linking to, so this would be for the entire data source.
Okay.
And so this might go to the project management system or to TDAR. For Emily, for example, the link here would go to the Sagas map for seed. It would go to the main seed website. I'll get into the other in just a second. A way to update and replace your own data. So this will, as we get different iterations and as people can load have their own data to load, this will be a way to load that. And then for each of the fields, the ability to clean up the display name to be something that either is more useful or more explanatory or just not machine generated. And so, for example, getting some explanation of what P4 is for Nabon data might be useful for putting in for less faunally specific people.
So this is basically every field in your data. We all do it. We all make databases where we put abbreviations in the field names that make total sense to us at the time, and no one else knows what they mean. So obviously, as this is a data interchange and sharing tool, you need to write good explanatory display names for all of your fields when you load data, or else no one else will understand what you have.
Yeah. We also, in order to get the timeline working, I've had to create a mapping to a given field to be the start and end date, excuse me. And so this is the way to map your data to start and end.
And so this is coming back to maybe briefly to what Richard and Anthony were talking about. This is how we handle the temporal mapping and how we tag different data sets to start and end dates. We may need to think about how we're handling that for different types of data.
Yeah, but I tried to do it in just the...
Yeah. This was step one.
Yeah.
Step one is, can we assign start and end dates to things?
Yeah. And then right now, not available to you, but as an admin, we have the ability to produce a template for each of the data sources. So the title template is what shows up on the map when you click on a thing. So right now, for the NABONE data, which is not the SVK site, it's not working, but I could click in here and then start building out what needs to go in here in a way that might better display.
And I think this is a really important part of the tool for you guys as data providers, and we've talked about this in previous meetings. What are the first bits of data that you would want someone to see about your data source? So kind of what are the highlights, the summary elements that you would really want people to see initially? So if you think about any given big data record, and I always think about it in terms of archaeological data. You know, when I have someone looking at a site record, I usually really want them to see maybe the definition of the site, so kind of the short definition or description, and maybe the time period it goes with. And there are maybe 15 other pieces of information tagged to that record that are slightly less relevant that people still need to be able to get to, but they're not like the top 3 summary elements or highlight elements. Yeah. And so I think I'd be encouraging all of you to be thinking about your own data, and you know, if you, what the first 2 or 3 things you would want someone to see about your data, what those would be, because that's what would go into.
Yeah, and I just switched to a different NABONE to the SVK one so that you could see what it really looks like. And so we can render a title, or what that short display is. We can render the results. And that's what I have the tabular results for NABONE showing, which I chose the bone, the species, the unit, phase, age, sex, and burning, just as random things to choose. And then the ability for a given row of data to build a customized link. So I know with Emily's data, we have for each Saga citation, we have a link back into the Saga map. And so this would allow you or Phil or somebody else who has an interface that is at that level to link directly back into the data there. Because I figured that would be important. So the nice thing about this is that it's a very dynamic template that we can build out as needed. As opposed to having something that is heavily customized or heavily manual in manipulation. And so as your data will change, because we know it will, there's a fairly easy way to sort of correct these templates. So once your data is loaded, we can then go in and build out the combinators. And so the combinator tool is grown a little bit since you've last seen it, and it's still loading.
There you go.
There we go. It's not meant to be fast. It's just meant to work. And so you can choose your data source. And so if we choose the Icelandic farms, we can then either create a new combinator for one that has not been done. You've got this nice little checklist that just got replaced by the search results. And then I can choose the different fields that are in Gisli's little data set, which is not so little. And I can either do an equals, not equals, or contains, because this is a textual search, and you can see that it gives lots, it gives all the examples.
So, and this is where the counts are, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the number in parentheses is the number of data elements attached to each of these terms. So again, this is another feature to make sure as you're building a combinator, we don't want you to build combinators that don't pull back any data.
Yeah.
Because that's not going to be useful. So it's kind of a shorthand for you of how much data is attached to each of these terms.
And then as you do a search or select data, it should be doing a search and come back with results on the side. And I'm not sure what it's doing, but.
So in that query, ideally what you would be doing, so if you push the plus, is we're thinking of these as and or queries, or and or except queries. So this is the part of the system where you're taking multiple elements from your data set and turning them into, thinking back to that NASA levels of data, what combinations of data within my data set would I be querying for to mean something? So a really typical example from dataARC is MNI, the minimum number of individuals, where you're essentially combining your species data and your count data into your MNI, right? So in this data set, it might be Shire name plus a certain date range is going to bring something back.
If you count by MNI, you have to be very specific about how you're doing it. Because otherwise you get very different results.
Mm-hmm.
So an MNI is calculated just on bone and species will be very different ones. Bone species, fusion rate, adult, non-adult, left versus right.
Yeah, and so you see number 4, description? Okay, so this is a perfect example, in fact, because what we want you to do as the expert is to build the query with those elements, and then where it says description, you must explain why you have built your combinator the way you have built it. So in that box, Tom, you would be writing, this MNI query brings, is being done in this way, which has these implications. MNI can also be calculated in these other ways. So
this is actually one of the reasons why we don't use MNI in the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
It's idiosyncratic and people don't specify how they calculate it. And there's been several studies demonstrating you get like a 50% difference in the outcome depending on how you define it. So MNI sucks.
Yeah.
So we could actually,
so what's better? NISP.
Yep.
Okay. So you would do NISP, and in your description you can include your rant about why NISP is better than MNI.
I can just include citations.
Yeah, and that's
number 7, citations for why.
So the thing that's really nice about this is trying to be really transparent about the limitations or why you're trying to focus on NISP versus MNI and why you're creating your combinator. And so people who, Rachel was throwing out MNI, but she's not a specialist like you are. And so now she learns a lot about what your kind of thinking was in creating that combinator.
Yeah. So
sorry now.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so this is a really good example of why we have those parts into building the combinator. So you create the query you want. In the description field, you are writing out what you expect the query to bring back and kind of your expert opinion on why this is a useful thing to search for. And that citation field number 7 is a place for you to cite articles, studies, data sets, other external things that are supporting the creation of your combinator. So we see this as a really kind of scientifically important part of the tool because this is where you are defining how we're aggregating data. So we really want you to back it up with citations, published studies, your explanation of what you're doing.
I don't know if I missed this. The query, can we have logical operators between those rows?
And or and except, yes. So you write the description. We've managed to jump forward a little bit. You then assign it to a topic or more than one topic. So this is where you link your data to the concept map. So this again is a really important part of the system. So you're then saying, okay, this combination of data in my data set, I think it has a direct relationship to this set of topics. So you're essentially saying when someone searches on that set of topics, I want them to pull back my data.
And the parenthetical here is the number of concepts that are, or the number of combinators that are linked to that concept already.
So again, this is kind of showing you what bits of the conceptual map are already well populated or don't yet have data mapped to it. And again, this is kind of a decision for you as a data provider, you know, something with a lot of stuff already mapped to it, and you're going, oh yeah, they should also be looking at my data, and that's got quite a lot attached to it, so people are likely to click on that. I'm going to map my data to it as well, versus filling out bits of our conceptual universe that nobody else thinks has yet said their data talks to, and you saying, you know what, my data can really speak to that topic. And
Can I
then
just
you
ask
have
you
to name.
just a really basic question? So
Yeah.
choose a data source. So
Yeah.
is that is what you just put in? Is that right?
That's your
So
data.
supposing just it was some Tephra data that
Yes.
was putting in. It was like, so it would be that would be called something, wouldn't it? When I was uploading it.
Yeah.
And how would I make sure that I was consistent with what other Tephra data is called? So you have consistently, when you're filling this out, it fits in with the way that it's been done before, because I might not remember what I've done before. Just so that there's some consistency between the way that these have been coded. Would it be able to remember how a similar data set was recorded in the past, so there's some consistency? Because obviously you might actually you might do it slightly differently, just because you don't remember exactly how it.
You mean a similar combinator that you created before?
So you might, you might not remember exactly how a previous data set, which is pretty much exactly the same type of data set, has been processed here.
So I would say right now, so in addition to creating a new combinator, if there are existing combinators, you can select them to look at them or edit them.
Yeah. Obviously that would speed the process up, but also mean there's more consistency as well.
Yeah.
Because you may not remember.
I think, can I go to a different screen, Adam?
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think we've got, Seed's got stuff mapped to it, doesn't it?
I was mapping stuff on the Orkney fauna.
Okay,
too.
yes, let's look at that. So like if you go to Orkney fauna, you will see that there's a bunch of existing things.
Okay.
Yeah, we have slightly goofy creative names at the moment. Is yours the marine mammal test?
There was a barbecue one too, which
that was mine.
I got it.
That was totally
the barbecue one. That's funny.
So yeah, so you can choose an existing indicator.
Okay.
Does this answer your question a little bit?
Yeah.
And an existing combinator, sorry. And it will show you what you've done before. So you could, I think, hopefully have 2 tabs open and be like, what did I do last time?
Yeah, there's also the preview, which I haven't shown yet, but it takes a little bit longer to load because what it does is it shows you the name of the combinator, the number of actual matches, who created it, the data scheme it's based on, any description query, and then the topics that are mapped.
Yes, this is another way for you to go back and see what else has been done in a summary sort of way with that data set.
Can we make that sortable?
That would be kind of, that's not a Tim thing, this is an Adam thing. That would be a little bit challenging because you can map to multiple topics. But sortable would be important as we get more of these.
Yeah.
And another question, can we call this the combinator?
You can call it whatever you'd like to call it.
It was a bit difficult to say.
You seem like you were practicing that in your head for a while. We'll give you like 3 beers today and see how you do.
So
sounds fine.
Yeah, I was like, yes, if you'll buy me beer. So this is part of the interface that we really want to spend some time with today and the next couple of days to have you guys start to build some combinators using your, preferably your own data.
And for things that don't work, this is one case, well, we're definitely, well, I want to know in all cases, but specifically, do you want to know? To get into it, if you go to the site and then type /login, we, instead of doing this with usernames and passwords that we would manage ourselves, we're pushing off to Google and Facebook. So if you go in and start to register, or start to log in at least, then I can give you privileges to actually connect. So, and
That's happening right now.
where it pops up in email, there's no point in just putting in the email. I'll go in a second and just grant people permission.
So I would say while people are registering, as you should be doing, any questions or comments on kind of the Combinator page? You probably have more questions as you start to use it. Maybe just one other thing to show on it.
I'm totally not part of this community,
Yeah.
but
Yes, you are.
I am now.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
too
guess
late. You're at a
questions.
meeting.
Are there any naming conventions that you're going to suggest for the combinators to help people find them?
In terms of the names that people are calling the combinators,
Yeah.
I think we're open to discussion, but leaving it up to each domain expert, because it's hard for us as central people to tell you as field experts what vocabularies are accepted in your community. I would say please use combinator names that mean something in your field.
Yeah, human readable.
So in the access databases that we use for the NAVO package, there's a series, structured series of queries there already. They all have the same names. It's like cow, neonatal, that kind of thing. And you'll see they're very consistent across all the databases, all have those. People are messing around with them to add some queries sometimes, it's not necessarily always consistent. They're all there. And if you look at data view, there's an explanation for what the query is.
So that's very similar.
So there's also an explanation in data view of what the field names mean too. So if you wonder what GL is, greatest length, it's actually in the access database as it now stands. So when we put the NAVO together, there's a lot of concern about going from the raw data set to actual queries which will produce the information you need, and to do that in a very structured fashion, just so we produce reports in a reasonable time period. And actually everybody looks in the same places. We're discovering that we're screwing up a lot. I was screwing up a lot because I was structuring queries in a different way for different reports. And so they weren't always 100% the same when you really wanted to be 100% the same. So that's sort of a non-trivial consideration there. So we had to be kind of careful about that. I think we probably should have been more careful. But anyway, that's in the data set you got. And again, the concern for us is always that the raw data isn't really that useful. It's actually dangerous. It's kind of like giving your 2-year-old a loaded pistol. Because if you just say, okay, here's all the raw data from all the bones we've got, to make sense out of that, you really need to have queries which then generate consistent results, which is archaeologists will recognize as important, because we're really interested. It's not how many left cow fingers there are, but it's there's a bunch of questions which we always are going to be asking for data. You're usually doing it the same way. When you're building a report, which is I'm doing one for Civic Authority right now. That's what you're doing. You're going through the structured series. And there's about 20 queries, which we normally do with the access database to pull out this information. Then you drop at least a current workflow can drop in Excel and start messing with graphs. So that's some of that work is there.
Yeah, I think Adam, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, and it'd be useful to try and see if you can recreate any of the tools.
So I would say that
And hear in a bit more of a visual.
So I mean, we can work to clean
But-
that up and to make it more standard. Because I think again, there's always ad hoc. The ad hoc messing with things is one morning or one deadline, so you mess things up.
And I would say the idea in this tool is that the combinators are those queries you're talking about that you as the expert are creating, where you're not showing the end user the raw data, but you are showing them those query results. And that's why we want you to really take your time and think carefully when creating your combinator.
We do want to have the end user go drill down to what data sets so that somebody can check to see if we're right. But I think if that's the only level which they encounter it, they're going to get swamped. And ultimately they're going to come up with some bad information.
And what you're seeing on the side that Rachel as she mouses over, and this is one case where there's either a bug or needs some more work, is that it's supposed to be showing the title level data that was shown in the map before. As you mouse
Showing the
over
IDs.
each of the IDs. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but it's not working. And
It's okay. We're debugging in life, but that's yeah.
the other thing I'd say is that for those of you who did register, log out and log in again, and you should now have or be able to see the tool.
Yeah. So the only other thing I would point out on the Combinator page before we maybe turn everyone loose to create a couple is that we have actually filled out the help text on each of the little help buttons where we are hopefully telling you in a useful way what we want you to do in each bit of that.
It does work. It does work.
Have people successfully logged in?
Yeah, create, edit, preview has appeared.
I had a question about logins too, and about your community, because I don't know what countries people are coming from, and how broad your community is, but I know in IASC, for example, we can't just use Google and Facebook because that leaves out certain countries' access.
Like who?
China, especially. Or people, it would be enough of a hurdle for a lot of Russians, for example, to not join. But I don't know who's participating in this community, so it might be a non-issue.
I think it might be an issue that we'll have to deal with in a year or two.
I don't think it's an issue at the moment.
What solution have you guys come to for this?
Well, we do manage our own
Your
username and
logins.
logins and things like
Yeah. No, good point.
that. But I don't know whether it's, can you tie into like DK or something like that if you want to get Russians or that whole situation. I have no idea.
I think we can tie into a lot of different things. Those were just
the easy two.
Easy
no,
two.
it makes total sense.
I'll just ask about, so obviously a lot of places will be in Iceland and there'll be misspelling of Icelandic names. People will use the wrong characters. Will the searching of this be able to cope with if you typed in if it was a name that didn't have an accent? I think not everyone is going to spell things
You
correctly.
mean on the keyword search? For
Well,
example?
yeah, I mean, if you have...
I think that was what was going on with the attempt that I made with PC's database. It should do that. And on the what I've avoided putting up is this slide that I did last time of what the backend is made of. But there are basically 3 phases of work being done. Phase 1 is the work that happens before the data is presented to me, which is to convert it to a GeoJSON file. That is mostly is just a standard way that has a temporal component, a spatial component, plus a bit of data associated with it. Between phase 1 and phase 2 is the data loading of putting that in as a data source. And we load that into a backend data store that is used to power this interface. This interface is then either on a regular basis or whenever I go into the admin area and tell it to reindex, it takes all of the data that you provided, both the raw data and then the topics and the combinators and all of that, as well as the hrepper and the GeoJSON information that's provided, and indexes it in a way that can power the front end. And so that transfer gets produced, and then that is what powers the search interface on the front end. And I know that on the very front end that we definitely deal with the international character issues. On this middle side, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just, well, on the front end, the map, for example, you clicked on one thing, it had loads of, it wasn't dealing with it properly on the bubble that came out. There was lots of little things which mean it's not dealing with it properly. But even if users who are using it won't necessarily know how to type in the Icelandic characters.
Yes, yeah.
So they're not going to type in like an F and a thorn and
right.
They're going to probably get that wrong.
But the answer is it should be.
Yeah.
It should take care of it.
Yeah.
And
I think the broader point, I think it's a really good point. In this kind of broader centralization of very distributed, very different things, you're going to have some sort of curation at that center level. Whether it's just looking at those place names, or there are errors that come in that get introduced, or inconsistencies from different areas. I think the tool, like depending on how many features there are, can handle a large percentage of those, which is fantastic. But having human eyes on it at some point, especially early on, looking at issues that might not have been expected, is going to be really helpful. Yeah. So whether that's something that there's capacity for in this particular context, or something to think about going forward in terms of like an operationalization kind of component, just keeping that somewhere in the mix will be really nice and necessary.
Mm-hmm. Phil, did you have a question?
Yeah, back to Thomas' point about access to raw data. I don't think the dataARC should be fed raw data from NABO generally. I think it should be things like the results of the queries you use. And that NABO should be producing, like we did with seed, NABO should be producing a table or something that is then turned into GeoJSON, fed into this, that allows you to link to wherever NABO is storing the raw data.
Do you have an example
And
of the seed?
the people who are most likely to misuse the raw data, not to drill down to
right. It's tricky. That sort of Orca's thing last fall, which was just an attempt to get everything in percentages extracted, and also using Zark database. I've got some stuff I can show later tomorrow about that. I mean, it was terrible programming, but at least it was getting around the problem of you're looking at Cal left fingers when you should be looking at the forest, so to speak.
So as an example from seed of kind of presenting this more summarized data as opposed to presenting the raw data. Phil, do you want to kind of explain what we've done here?
Well, this ended up being raw data by mistake. So it's not very, but if you could imagine that the numbers on the left are percentage, something like that. And that's a percentage calculated across this raw data. It's categorized data, so this isn't really raw data. So there's a couple of
because
queries.
it's the eco codes at the bottom that get fed by your raw data, right?
Yeah, so for those who haven't heard this before, the bottom is a list of environments that the beetles, in this case, can require for their existence. So you've got water beetles, under aquatics, and bone beetles, under fowl, and then what we maybe want to show here is the proportional amount of these different environments that the beetles in that sample represent. And that will allow the user to either to search for the presence of an indication of that environment, or somebody who's more interested in details, look at relative proportion of them in the beetle data. So if you want to say, look for somewhere where there's a lot of woodland, you maybe want to search for over 50% woodland. But you wouldn't be looking for the MNI of a specific beetle that is attached to trees.
But that would be up to you to create the combinator in the back end saying, and then that would be able to display. So yeah, we would need to think about what that looks like when the user on the front end is moving down.
Yeah, so all of these, we have a direct link to a unique ID seed that will take you to that sample. We have to figure out exactly where that lands in seed, but in theory, every sample has a DO, or will have a DOE when that's working. A DOE?
Do I?
It's DOE in Swedish. At the moment, we're working on landing pages for sites rather than samples. But yeah, we have to think about it. But there is a mechanism there. It's not too difficult to do. It's difficult to figure out, but not difficult to do.
Are the topics arranged in some manner that I'm not getting, or are they just sort of
in which view? In the back end view?
In the back end view?
Because they're sort of not alphabetical, and I can't tell if they're topical.
It's not
It's not arranged yet, probably, is the
If you
answer.
can find an order for how they're actually laid out, then
I can't.
you have a better working brain than I do.
Oh, sure as hell don't. So just basically
They're,
scrolling down.
they're not in order.
And also, are you still adding to topics?
We're trying to stop. I'm trying to stop. So what I would say, for purposes of this meeting at least, obviously this group has spent a lot of time on the topics thing, and I still can't use a mouse on a Mac. Different people's computers. But we've spent a lot of time on the topic map and defining the topics and the relationships. And so what I want us to do in this meeting, rather than focusing on that, is to focus on mapping the data to the topics. So creating those combinators and tagging those different combinators to topics. Because I think that's when we'll start to really be able to see what combinations of data are getting pulled back by the system. And, you know, kind of if the topic search is doing something useful or how it's working. So rather than doing yet another round of revising the topic map, which we all know we could do infinite rounds of, what I think is going to be helpful at this point in our development cycle is to start mapping data to those topics. Now, what I would say, and Vicki, this might be particularly relevant for someone like you who's kind of new and coming in, is if you've got data and you say, there's no topic here that I think is a particularly good fit for my data.
Very terrestrial topics.
Yeah,
So.
that we want to know. There is a fishing zone and there should be different types of water. But yeah, so I would say for, you know, that is when we would want to expand and add to the topic map, and we certainly can update it. But I would say at this point, I want the topic map updates to be driven by new data sets coming in. So Vicki, if you come in and you say, okay, what I really need is these 3 topics that are going to help me hook my data into all of this, then we're going to add those 3 topics. But I'm trying to dampen down the philosophical shell game that is mapping all of the topics together and let it be kind of driven by the data needs a little bit.
I think we do need to expand the Tephra one a bit.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's not really connected to very much so far.
Yeah.
And that is one of the key things about Iceland is Tephra chronology, which actually is spelled as Tephra chronology.
Oh.
You need to change the spelling.
Okay, fair, totally fair. So what I would say is then if you can come up with a list of the expansions that you want, or we can discuss the expansions that you want, maybe with Richard as well. Because the ones I currently have in are based on the conversation we had in Scotland in the car. But now that it's in there, it may be apparent that we need some more things.
We could just have a look. We won't go mad.
Yeah,
I think there are other connections that can be made.
So we want to do that and maybe an expansion for Vicki. And this sounds like the space of, we've got lots of side meeting time over the next couple days. And so that sounds like 2 side meetings that we are having.
We're only here tomorrow.
Okay, well, we're having that side meeting today or tomorrow then.
And the first thing we want to do tomorrow is talk about, while you guys are here, really how we want to start to fold in the work that you're doing and think about how your results should be displayed and things like that too. So we can do that tomorrow morning as a group. And Vicki might want to think about that.
Yeah, I think that the qualifier for the data that's loaded, we want to keep the concepts where they are for now and make sure that we can map as many combinators and spend our time creating combinators so that we can actually evaluate how some of the tool is working. Is really important. But for those people who we haven't loaded data for in any way,
we probably don't have enough concepts or enough connections to your concepts.
So,
yeah.
Do we want some time to play with the tool?
We can do that, or we can allow people to provide feedback on the front end, depending on how tired you are.
We've got a big
block.
block.
Distribute the tomatoes then.
The tomatoes.
for throwing.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got a big block of time scheduled for after lunch for you guys to go through and start creating combinators and really working on it. So, and we've probably got not that much time left before lunch.
We have about 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes. So maybe if we spend the next 20 minutes kind of thinking through some initial feedback on the front end interface, and then after lunch we can all start making combinators. Does this sound like a plan? Phil?
Can we change making combinators to combinatulating?
Yes, combinatulating.
That's another 3.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Can I start then?
Yes, Phil, please.
Last time we discussed the if you scroll down a bit, the what are they called? Themes?
The concepts?
The archaeology, historical,
Oh,
and model.
yeah. Okay, those themes. Yes.
I think I'd quite like climate on there. However,
I think we see climate as being under models, but maybe we need a better word.
we had some discussion on this, maybe climate or environment.
Yeah, so I think where I got into with this was that we talked about environmental models and we talked about climate models, and in a perhaps poor attempt to lump those things together, we used the word models. But if we want to call it something else, it's easy to change that name.
Because the other thing, I'm sure this is a repeat of an earlier discussion, but whether some data sources are going to map to multiple of those.
How do we have it set up in the back end right now?
Just one question.
Just one.
Would
Yeah.
we want to do something like split seeds, say, into multiple feeds that feed into those where it's most relevant?
That's perfectly valid.
Mhm.
Because
So-
I don't know that you want to get into the mapping of specific rows of a data source to different categories in a logical way. But yeah, the way that I sort of set up the data sources was that if seed wanted to go in there twice, as either the bugs database and seed or seed in different ways, that we could easily facilitate that.
So where would in there the bugs would go into which category? Like
It would depend on which data set.
Yeah, so it might be from an environmental record rather than an archaeological record.
But
So
it's tricky. It's also it's pretty messy in terms of the way it's stored in the database as well. Because some sites will be an archaeological site, and you'll have a parallel feed sequence. You could call that a climate record or an environmental record, but the samples from the site are archaeological records. So I don't really know.
I would say right now we are forcing you to choose what you see your data set as primarily being, with the acknowledgement that all of our data speaks to all of these topics, which is why we're all here together in the room.
Yeah. Seed is sort of an aggregate database, though, is a special case, and that is why we could load it twice.
Yeah.
So Tephra could be the same. Tephra could be from an archaeological site, or it could be from source sections that we know in here, archaeology. So that's more an environmental record.
Yeah.
A model seems to me to be quite a particular category. It suggests not necessarily even real data.
Yes, there's some sort of process between something you've measured and something, whereas our things are actual.
So
measurement.
Yeah, the model doesn't have to have any real data in it at all.
Is there a term we would prefer over model?
I don't know what is in model. What is in model? What data is in model?
Seed is in model.
But then it's the actual, it's process data that's coming in there, so it is a model.
But theoretically, all of the data coming in will be processed, so they could all be called in some ways.
Do we want to go back to environment stroke climate?
I think that would be clearer.
I agree, yeah.
For someone who hasn't had this discussion, to come in and look at the website.
And just coming like from a completely non-environmental perspective, when I saw model first, I assumed it was like we were doing modeling. So rather than
like simulations and okay, we can make that change. Yeah. Adam's like, Adam can make that change.
While we're having this conversation, you may well have had a conversation about what to call about historical, but I would like to consider calling that textual or documentary, possibly rather than historical.
Textual would be better.
Because historical is also rather kind of fluid. I mean, why isn't the historical rather than archaeological?
So textual.
Textual is, I'm using archaeological, textual, genetic for my points of data. Because textual is easier for the lit and
so
I think
under historical, what is basically it's the farms, business data, and my data, and all of that is derived from textual sources, so documentary or textual would be more transparent.
Sure. I hope someone is noting this in
I
the Google
have
Doc.
it written. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. Okay, good. It's always good to rename a couple of terms at every meeting.
We're happy with archaeological.
Usually not here to complain.
I'm sure somebody can pick a hole in it.
And someone like
Pick a hole in it.
pick a hole in the
Okay, so
archaeological.
we're now saying
That's a good word.
textual, archaeological, and environmental.
Environment.
would genetic fit environmental then? Where would genetic do that?
Depends whether it's an archaeological sample or environmental
I
sample.
think environmental is the best. Genetic will really confuse people. Things we can
Yeah, I
get.
think it would fit more in genetic than in model. Or
In
environmental.
environment.
Yeah. I would say it's your decision as kind of the expert data provider as to where you want to tag your stuff. Yeah. The other thing I was going to show was, I don't think we've talked about. Oh, I'm the worst at this. This is amazing.
You see, if it was a PC, it would pop up.
Yeah, Adam, can you rescue me?
We see you're not used to using it.
Yes, I know. Where's the bit with the, it's under topics, I think. Where you map to physical, conceptual, and all of that stuff.
Oh, yeah. So this isn't.
Do you want to talk to people about this or no?
I don't know. I mean, the way that I was trying to do it was that you could say anything under E39
Yeah.
was physical or one of these.
Physical, conceptual. But yeah, we don't need to explain this to them because I'm the only one who's ever going to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, fair. Okay.
Just like you can change your scope.
Okay, so maybe coming back to the front end, Adam's gonna be in charge of driving the computer right now because I don't know how the mouse works. I feel like one of my students right now. I have a couple who can't use like a regular external mouse. Now Adam's caught the disease.
No, it's just you're pressing it too hard and too
I
long.
just found that out. You press it too hard, apparently.
Of course, it's not important.
Yeah, different devices. So other thoughts on the front end interface from people?
Would it be possible to change the layer that appears at the front to the one with the least points so that the smaller data sets become more visible?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, we're also planning on implementing some clustering features on the map. So that you know the data sets like this, when you're at the zoom level, it'll cluster them all into kind of spiral them out. See what's there.
So sorry, Phil, you meant that the smaller data sets would be on the top.
So that we can see
display.
that there's a blue point.
Yeah.
Layers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we can.
Clustering is also an interesting thing to discuss on how to do it. I don't like clustering. I want to see points, how messy it is. But some people like clustering.
I think at the different zoom levels, showing the points at different sizes might help too. That is that as you zoom out, if the points were smaller, you could better see that there was other data. You might actually see the neighbor.
In clustering, I think primarily for seed data, for example, where you have multiple things in one exact same coordinates.
Yeah, that could we have them toggle to clustering on them?
Is there a reason that you would want to zoom in just to Iceland?
It's where most of our data is
Speed
right
of
now.
loading the data. And yeah, it's where most of the data is. We have some data in
Greenland.
Or in Greenland, I noticed, but only when you zoomed out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're new to it, I don't know how many new versus standard community users. but I wouldn't think to zoom out to look for things.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. That we might want to start in a slightly more zoomed out place.
But then it's the less useful home screen, so I recognize that.
Yeah.
You could zoom to extent the data.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
you gave us data from
That's
everywhere.
true, I just gave you one.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons up until a week ago, loading everything took 5 minutes. So
I used to get very bored waiting for the
We,
site to load.
yeah, we would sit there and wait
and
for a
wonder,
while.
It's Phil's fault.
yeah, it's mostly
Good Skype meetings.
Yeah, there was some awkwardness. We had plenty to talk about.
I've given you opportunities for optimization.
Yeah.
yes, and we did.
Mhm. So I would say, so we've kind of been emphasizing today, that we've built in this idea that you can see by shading kind of how many results are present, like in the different time categories or in the different regions or coming back from your query. So I know we've explained it to you, but do you feel like that's reasonably visually intuitive? Like as a user coming to this, are you going to get that when you're looking at the data in the timeline like this, the fact that there are kind of colored boxes filled in here means that's where the data is? Like, does that bit of the design work for people?
It does, but the colours on the map don't work when you colour.
Also, the years there, I mean, once you looked at it, you realize it's A, B, B, C.
Mhm.
Not necessarily everyone's using that kind of convention, like using B, B.
Mhm.
So maybe just say.
We need some labels.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I don't think we mentioned is that the shading is broken into like 5 different shades, from
Mhm.
light to dark.
Yeah,
And we
darker
do it
blue,
based
lighter
on-
blue.
Based specifically on the data within that category. So,
Mhm.
that one's dark right there. It's got 4,000 records. That's the darkest and has 8.
Yeah.
So it does like a quantile.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be interesting to talk about, because obviously this goes 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000.
Mm-hmm.
1,000, so the Viking Age, for example, goes on past 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
So as a division of time, it might be worth maybe some people, archaeologists, talking about whether, I'm not sure how we want, obviously it's not all Viking anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but it's, I'm not sure how useful it is to have those divisions. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you may have already had that discussion when I was in the last meeting or something. I don't know. But I don't know how useful it is to divide, 0 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000. I don't how, because that's a big division. Suddenly everything changes, and there's no real change. I mean, Iceland becomes Christian, but technically the Viking Age continues. Settlement of Iceland is the colonization period is before that. So it's what are these divisions here which are hardwired into it? How useful are those?
Like, I do think it would be really beneficial to say I want everything from the early medieval period or something.
Yeah,
like
because
that,
these are
instead of a calendar year.
Yeah.
I don't
Which
know.
is more like what we had in the original prototype, where
But being able to have both options to search by calendar year versus by archaeological phase versus geological phase.
But I mean, you do then run into that difficulty of different people.
Oh, I know that. Yeah.
Different interpretations of
Well,
what the early medieval period is.
And that's also different between Iceland and Greenland too, right?
Yeah.
So,
When it's all was contingent on where.
yeah.
But that's not really a problem, is it? It's a visualization.
Yeah.
It's not
But it's something that needs to be signaled.
Oh.
Or it's,
Yeah,
That's where
yeah,
the
yeah.
period over there
the
is.
citations.
This is where period would give
Yeah.
us a way to say for a given place at a
Yeah.
given time, this is what medieval is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But would it be a problem to be able to say this kind of toggle on and off again of I want to search by calendar year versus I want to search by archaeological phasing versus I want to search by geological phasing? Is that?
But I mean, so if we did the work ahead of time, that's where period O is going to help.
Yeah.
Because that would feed into the indexing and analysis that I'm doing.
By the work, do you mean someone needs to go in and create the period O spreadsheet? Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
And just have our experts check to make sure that we're right.
But this is a case where we put this work off because as up until now, with no way to interact with the data, it's sort of a conceptual problem that is, I think, hard for people to talk about or visualize.
Yes.
But with a way to apply those mappings, we should be able to do something that people can see and interact with better.
So what Adam and I are talking about is this program called Periodo. It's period.o. Adam Rabinowitz, who created it, I think regrets that name every time people talk about it. But it's actually a really nice way to say, to kind of create a schema for how dates operate in different, it's just at the country level right now. So we could say in Iceland, the years, 850 to 1000 mean this archaeological phase, and you can kind of set that up and then be able to provide a way to search by both dates and archaeological phasing. So we did a lot of timeline work in the first grant that we can kind of go back and start to create a periodo schema, and then probably have someone like you, Tom, check when I create it and make sure that I have it correct, and then maybe Richard can work on that too with me or something like that.
Yeah.
So.
And the idea with these is that they're citable. So the system that Adam Rabinowitz has set up with this is a system designed for communities like ours to kind of make published declarations about how we're doing our periodization that other people can refer to. I guess from an interface point of view, and Tim, you may have some comments on this. So yes, of course, we could have 3 different options for ways that you can search by time. I don't know, are there implications for that in terms of load time, ease of use, just kind of clarity of interface?
I'm not sure the easiest way to do it. I mean, right now, it seems like selecting a period that you're interested in, but it would be better if I could display it somehow. I don't know. I have to think
Yes, I think there may be some design thought there if you're essentially getting to the timeline, and it's going to default maybe display filtering chronologically as we have it now. You're then going to have options that say, or you can search by archaeological period, or you can search by geological period, and then it was flipping through a different tab. So I'm always nervous about feature bloat.
So a great example would be the sort of landnam period, the settlement period of Iceland, and then the way that Magdalena's working, she's got evidence when people began to arrive in Iceland, but it's before the colonization period. So these are actually really useful divisions of time.
But only for Iceland, and that is one of the challenges that the interface has to deal with is with all of the interface elements, we want them to ideally cut across all of the different locations that were the basis of our analysis queries, which are beyond Iceland.
No, I agree completely. And we would have to, in a bigger scale, think of the Faroes, which has, the settlement period began much earlier. We know, and obviously the long history in Orkney and Shetland. But if you're just working in Mebatten, you don't really. I know that you can make connections, but if you're just studying one place, you don't care about Greenland or the Faroes or whatever. You actually want to find something that's relevant to you. So this, I would have thought, should be flexible enough to deal with that. And hopefully some way can be found in visualizing these timelines so people can interact with them in a sensible way.
I think that
it can make connections where necessary to other places.
I think that it can be, but I think that we're just not yet at the point that
I appreciate that.
A few years ago, James Barrett, he is all up in Iceland for using terms like Landnam period, Commonwealth period, and so you should use common terms that go across the whole Viking area. Early Viking, late Viking age. That's what you should be using. You should be using these just Iceland-specific terms, unless you're only speaking about Iceland. Even so, I think he had a point, which is to say that if you're actually going to talk about the Viking age across this whole sweep in Northern Europe, you have to use common terms, and there are some common terms. Early Viking, late Viking, kind of thing, terminal Viking sometimes. So those have definitions.
And you're comfortable with those terms from kind of a NAVO community uses.
Sure.
Okay.
For the greater good of being able to reach out to these other parts of the community. I mean, and this is something we've talked about a lot in these meetings,
Yeah.
that we may have to give up some local specificity for the sake of integration.
And then we talk to historians, they really start duking out of what you mean by things like high medieval.
Yeah.
But some of these terms we could generalize land settlement or colonization periods, and that would be a term that's relevant at different time periods.
In different places. Yeah. It's more of a concept than a temporal.
Yes.
And settlement, there's going to be commonalities, or there's a sea settlement.
Yeah.
It's unrelated.
This is stuff to speak for.
Colin, we can jump to one more thing before lunch.
Sure. Well, no, it's just another idea to talk about the brainstorming bit at the front end.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned this to Colleen already, but I think it would be really useful to have almost like small files for each data set, so the user can see snapshots, snapshot overview or information about each data set.
Would you
And
see
then
that kind of
importantly,
down here, basically, like when you moused over it or something, or clicked on it, that you could get some information about that data set?
or a tab at the top. I mean, and I'm thinking more just a very short paragraph in which it would be possible, most importantly, to point out the limitations of your data set. So for the sagas, I would say, must be remembered that the data from the sagas is not historical data, so extrapolating about the time it's described in the sagas. Just a proviso. I mean, for my part, just to kind of cover my back.
I feel like that's also, and again, it's not part of the site we've built out much yet, but what's going to appear in that Y section, I think, is really going to be important, and is going to be a place for a lot of those provisos and health warnings about.
Yeah, I think
results.
that's great. I do think we need something like we had in the original prototype, where maybe like next to the dataARC name, we have like a little about, and it gives not only the biographies of the data sets, but also like what the project is actually doing, and whether it links back to the project website, or kind of does a little introduction on what the tool is supposed to be doing, because we all have been sitting in rooms together and we know what it's supposed to be doing, but an outside user will not. So I think that would be, so we can have the kind of overview of the project and then little biographies of data sets. I think is a good idea there.
Can I ask a question based on what you just said? This is the first time I've met with this group, but you just said outside user, and I've been struggling with that this morning, is thinking about who this is aimed for, and is this internal, is this external? Because I'm thinking how marine mammal colleagues, who are completely separate from the historical community and archaeological community, would use this. If I told them that our data is now available there, I don't know how they would navigate here, but I don't know who the intended user is.
Yeah, so we've been developing this tool based on kind of having the NABO and kind of those internal people. But now that we have a new user interface that people can play with, we're going to be doing a ton of user testing with other people. So I think every meeting from here on out we go to will, like for the computer applications and archaeology meetings, so the CIAs, we're going to go next year and hold a workshop for people to come and test the tool, which will be interesting for kind of external archaeological users. So I think it'll be really interesting to be getting user feedback now and think about if it works for other communities, and can we make it easier for other communities to navigate.
And I would say, again, things that aren't built out yet, but should be by the CAA, are these examples that we have up top of the keyword, spatial, temporal, and concept examples. We'll hopefully have created, by the time we're showing it to people in the spring, some nicely worked out examples of how you use this tool to search for something that would hopefully facilitate things for external users. We probably also need to think about a kind of help screen that you land on when you first load the site that maybe has, as you were saying, the short explanation of what dataARC is, the links and bios of the different data sets, and a bit of a here's how you should here's how to navigate, and then you can come to this screen. So I would say we have not yet made that help landing page, but it's something that as we head to external users, we're going to need.
We definitely have more time to talk about this afternoon, but I know people need to either check into hotel rooms and maybe take a shower and a nap, and people want to eat lunch. So what are our lunch plans, Emily?
So the plan for lunch is to go to a place that is just diagonally opposite the building here, where one of Alan's colleagues recommended it. You can get big bowls of salad and different stuff. So hopefully that will be okay with everyone. And it should be no more than a few minutes walk across the road. So logistically though, we are reliant on Alan to get back in his building. So we kind of either need to
We
stick,
need to stick close to him.
stick close to him, or just have a telephone number handy if there are people going off to check in into hotels and then coming back home, then just give us a call and come and let you in.
Were you guys told when you could check in? 4. So you might as well come to lunch.
We can call and ask if anyone's checked out early. If people want to check in, we can call, but if you're just going to come back here after that.
Should we get people headed towards lunch?
What's the name of the place?
Local salad.
Is it okay for everyone to leave computers and things in the
Oh, yeah.
room?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, you may abandon your computer for safety.
Can I grab my adapter back from you?